I'm fired up for panel 2, corporate leaders, tech, and executives. All right, I'm going to bring up our moderator to the stage. Please join me in welcoming again Grace Young Foster.
So in terms of ceilings and how we experience those through our adopting and foster lens, as leaders and executives in these spaces, would love to hear a little bit about that.
Well, I can start with that if you'd like. My answer was gonna be, most of mine were self-imposed, to be frank, and maybe I didn't understand or know that at the time, but I set a lot of my own limitations, and they weren't necessarily limitations in terms of what position can I arise to, what level of leadership can I get, what salary can I get. I never had problems with any of that. I climbed the corporate ladder as a female in a very, very Midwestern old school manufacturing environment where I was not the norm. Um, but I didn't know any better because I'd never had been the norm. I was never, do you know? So I that was a comfortable thing for me to be um, in an environment that wasn't set for me or wasn't met for me. So I never had trouble climbing the corporate ladder. I think what happened for me is when I did get there, when I got to the place where I had tried to be for so long, an executive in a billion-dollar company, it was more of the same. Like, I wasn't able to set boundaries. I wasn't able to slow down, right? I always thought that performance and high performance was always expected from me, and I misread a lot of situations where maybe I could have and should have set back, let things naturally progress. I didn't have to be, the star performer, the most outstanding person in the room all the time, and then that's what ended up being a barrier for me is when I tried to do that and I wasn't able to step back and be part of a team and slow down and not always contribute as much. So, that would be my answer to that question. Self-imposed,
Thank you.
def
I'll jump in because very similarly, I didn't actually know that there were any limitations or ceilings for me because I was so used to not fitting in anywhere anyway. I'm one of 5 multiracial kids and, with white parents in the suburbs of New Jersey. And so through sheer will and, effort, I was also able to rise through the ranks and I didn't realize that it was at my own expense. So just that sheer exhaustion, like working 12-hour days. And I was actually really proud of myself when I was at Sony Pictures. I got a promotion and then another promotion. And with the last promotion, I was like, I appreciate that raise and that promotion. Is there any chance that there's more money in the budget? I was like really excited that I was advocating for myself. And, um, and my boss was like, "Are you actually trying to counteroffer your promotion that you didn't even know you were getting?" I said, "Yes, because I know how this works behind the curtain. We know how compensation works. You can't I can't not see that." And 2 weeks later, he came back and said, "Congratulations, because you asked, you got that much more money." And it wasn't until afterwards, and I looked back when I left that role, they hired a white man as a VP when I had been the executive director, and they hired a director to support him just to do the work that I had been doing, which is why I took a much needed break. But that was my ceiling, just that ignorance and the blinders. And also I think when we talk to each other and share these stories, then people can't pull the wool over our eyes anymore, you know?
I'll just say as an adoptee, to a and truly, um, white, suburban, privileged family, as a child, I was told, "You can be anything you wanna be." And then you get to corporate America and you're like, "No, you can't, because you look like them."
Yes.
And that doesn't fit our mold inside of corporate America. So now I had to go back to this narrative of this childhood of I should be all, I can be anything. And then what I did, and I regret it today, I went in thinking, if this is the system that is set in corporate America, and this is the blueprint of how some people succeed in this organization, who predominantly are white, and quite frankly, not as accredited, not coming with the experience, with the degrees, how do I play in that game? Okay, so I actually don't want to sit at that table in the cafeteria. I actually don't want to be associated with some of my colleagues who were Asian American in that space because I didn't want to be depicted from the people who were creating those ceilings to look like that group. And I shamefully sit here today and thinking about what of the things that I missed in that mindset. And, I sit here and go, was it me? How was I programmed? How did I learn this thing? And so for me, I regret, quite frankly, not spending time with people, quite frankly, who are more pedigree than me, who had more degrees than me, who are the smartest people in our organization in that space. And it wasn't until I was able to step into the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion that I got to spend time with employee resource groups and people doing this work and hearing their stories and learning about who they were and saying, oh my God, what a disservice to even my own growth. But it was that pre-programming in the beginning, the awareness from leaders in corporate America who were setting that ceiling.
For me, when I think about ceilings, like it didn't really resonate that there could have been a ceiling. But I what I like even just with corporate America, like when I was working and I never had issues with promotions. I never had issues with, pay increases. I think there was a beauty in my ignorance, right? Like coming into the space, being the first generation to go to college, being foster youth, getting adopted by my professors, like I never really like had a depiction of like, oh, what's the end goal for me, right? So then going into every space I entered, everything seemed accessible, right? There was nothing that told me no. There was nothing that got in my way. And if it did get in my way, I just figured out a way to get around it, right? Because that wasn't necessarily like a ceiling. It was just like, oh, this is an obstacle. I've dealt with obstacles before, right? I don't see it as this like this fictional wall that's in my way. So I think as an entrepreneur, a founder, I mean, I'm a black male and I've raised millions of dollars. Like less than 1% of founders, black founders, raise capital, period. So when I think about ceilings, it's like, no, it's just another obstacle. There's always going to be a way for me to find what I'm looking for. I just have to maybe do a little more work. And in some cases, I have a privilege of not having to do much work. So I think like you have to be careful in how you perceive your reality. Like as long as it's rooted in facts and it's rooted in real information that's warranted by real experiences, that's probably the safest way to kind of figure out your journey and how you want to navigate these walls, if you will. So, but that's my reality in terms of a ceiling, if you will.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I did something wrong because I definitely hit some ceilings. um, no, when I think about ceilings and limitations, I used to work for a guy named Dr. Dwight McBride. He wrote the book Why I Hate Abercrombie and Fitch, and he was my first boss at the new school. And whenever I was like spinning around about something during the day, he would say like the most powerful things. He really impressed upon me the notion of learned helplessness, and that is something a lot of minorities and people from who are not in the norm in America and turn themselves. And he would always say, like, I need you to stop asking for agency and exercise the agency that you already have. And that was something that was very powerful for me to hear from a black man who wrote a book about the intersection of queer lives and black lives in the 80s and 90s, before it was a cool thing to talk about, or before there was a Netflix documentary about the subject, about why Abercrombie and Fitch was such a horrible corporation at the time. So I think that was very foundational for me when I think about ceilings. I'm also very aware of my privilege, being male and white adjacent has gotten me, and being Asian too. There's a lot of assumptions about how hardworking we are. Compliments that I would get when I was in middle management. I would have white managers call me a machine, and that was meant as a compliment, right? He's a machine. He can produce. But that doesn't sound like leader to me. And so I had to be assertive in negotiations for salary. And that's sort of when I learned to just to be a little bit more forthright in those kinds of conversations, particularly with promotion and being willing to walk away. But I also had a ceiling of I've had the experience of being wrongfully terminated for whistleblowing, for discrimination in the workplace. And I think that really undid my firm belief, the capitalistic belief in meritocracy. Right. So like that is something I fell for because I kept advancing and I kept advancing quickly. So I thought, well, it's working out. So it must be true. And it turns out that it isn't, because if you're a high achieving woman or person of color, you will be superseded and you will be outpaced by someone with less qualifications if you're not in the norm in this current administration.
You know, I spend a lot of time in thinking about, of course, access and opportunity. And when I heard from Jonah and Leanne talk about negotiating that salary, I think the biggest ceiling breaker we can all have, quite frankly, as a collective, is sharing the salaries, sharing how we did it, sharing what were the questions, what were the kind of negotiation tactics that somebody uses. Because I think to actually break through some ceiling, I think we actually have to be sharing and being part of what was your practice in doing so.
I give my negotiation packages actually to my number twos at the different organizations because there are terms in there that I had never heard of before as I ascended, and no one coached me through that. So I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's illegal, but I just made copies. I just made copies and gave it to like all my brown and black friends to be like,
That's
this
it.
is what to ask for next time you get to. It's called a top hat program. It sounds like exactly as fancy as it is.
Yeah. Information really is power. I literally wrote this article because I've interviewed and negotiated thousands of like offers and salaries. And so I just wrote like how to negotiate like a pro because we know what the levers are. And once you've sat in the seat where you're hiring other people, you know where you can exert power. And so sharing that information, to your point, is how we support each other.